Please, can I ask you to be back in the room, ready for the final and what's promising to be the most interesting session of this whole conference? Please, can I invite you to take your seat and be ready? Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 8th and final sessions of this year's South China Sea Conference. This is a special session dedicated to the voices of the next generation. We at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam believes in young talent. We believe that our future lies with our next generations. We believe in dialogues, in communications, in networking. And the success of our generation's networking and cooperation is not enough to guarantee our future. And therefore, we believe that we need to invest in the next generation. And therefore, we have this session. And to have this 5 young, bright talent to be here with us, we have had a very intensive young leaders program. We invited registration from all over the world onto the program. And these 5 young, bright talents are the ones who are shortlisted from a very intense competition. So please join me in congratulating these young talents and the representative of our next generation. So what we are going to ask them to do now is to each of them briefly introduce themselves, and then they'll give us a reflection on what they have observed throughout this conference, and also to share their ideas, to share their thoughts on how we can move forward. We welcome their innovative, their fresh ideas, and also their suggestions and recommendations, and even policy options that they thought they have to offer to the very complicating task that were discussed during this conference. So to begin with, I'd like to invite Ms. Kate Clayton from La Trobe University of Australia. Kate, you have the floor.
All right, is this on? Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Clayton, a senior researcher and program officer at La Trobe Asia, where I also work on the program's Blue Security Program, which is an initiative to enhance maritime security collaboration and facilitating networking in the Indo-Pacific, supported by the Australian Department of Affairs and Trade. So before I begin, I'd like to extend my massive thanks to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and also the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, and for the opportunity for us as young leaders to present here at this conference. The inclusion of young leaders in conferences like this proceedings is key to ensuring peaceful, sustainable, and a prosperous South China Sea. The Indo-Pacific is home to 60% of the world's youth population. So that's around 750 million young people here in the Indo-Pacific. When we think about the future of the South China Sea, we often think that it's young people that will be leading the way. For many young people, including myself, who grew up in regional Australia, where bushfires were one of my main concerns growing up, climate change shapes our view of the world, but also our conceptions of security. That's why many of us here, many of my peers in the Young Leaders program, will be touching on climate change and environmental security. The theme of prosperity, of peace in the region forces a lot of us to be quite hopeful when often we're met with quite negative perceptions about what our future might be given the environmental concerns of the region. So I'm coming to this presentation as a bit of an outsider, firstly from Australia, but secondly also as a researcher primarily looking at climate change and foreign policy in the Southwest Pacific. But I think there's many things that we can learn from across the region when it comes to maritime security. So for my speech, I'll be looking at environmental cooperation as a baseline for confidence and trust building in the South China Seas. I'll have three parts to my speech. Firstly, the climate effects of Indo-Pacific in terms of the South China Sea. Secondly, areas of cooperation that might already exist and why this is important. So section 1, climate change is a shared threat. It's amongst the few things that states in the region agree on. Whilst different states may have experienced the effects of climate change differently, we all experience the effects of a warming world. The Indo-Pacific is one of the most climate-affected regions in the world, and climate change could alter the security dynamics of the region with increased piracy, transnational crime caused by climate displacement, poverty, as well as overfishing due to policing and ocean warming. This could overwhelm already existing state resources and maritime security capabilities, with an increasing need for additional ocean resource management, policing, as well as the work of coast guards. In terms of the region's populations, the UN Refugee Agency predicts that sea level rise could cause a humanitarian crisis. The Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre estimates that 65.9 million displaced people have already been displaced due to natural disasters between 2008 and 2020 in the Indo-Pacific. And by 2050, there could be as many as 89 million climate refugees in the region, primarily coming from Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Climate change will also impact sovereignty, with coastlines and maritime boundaries in flux due to rising sea levels. These shifts could impact UNCLOS, as well as how we understand exclusive economic zones and how maritime zones are defined. Maritime boundaries are vital for ensuring resource access, navigation rights, something we know all too well in the South China Sea. The blue economy, which incorporates renewable energy, fisheries, marine transport, tourism, as well as waste management, is vital for economic security and the livelihoods of those in Southeast Asia. Increased floods and ocean acidification, for example, threaten the fishing industry, on which 200 million people in the region depend on for food and jobs. Southeast Asia has been classified as one of the regions most affected and most vulnerable to climate change, with all ASEAN states, apart from Singapore, listed in the 50 most climate-affected regions between 1997 and 2016. Indonesia has the world's longest coastline, as well as Jakarta being the world's fastest sinking city. Parts of Ho Chi Minh City, Manila, and Bangkok, as well as Australia, will all be underwater by 2050. As an inherently maritime region here in the Indo-Pacific, we're particularly at risk from environmental disasters. Taking a closer look at the South China Sea, alongside the strategic and the political concerns that we've discussed over the past 2 days, the marine environment and coastal communities are facing perhaps a more existential threat as opposed to geopolitical concerns in that of climate change. As competition between the US and China increases, as well as sovereignty disputes continue, there remains food security, resource security, and marine biodiversity issues. Climate change, alongside the South China Sea tensions, could see an increase in IUU fishing, with more than 50% of the world's fishing vessels operating in the South China Sea. Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand are among the world's top 10 largest fish producing countries. As fishing stocks decrease, fishing vessels will use all corners of the EEZs, even the ones with overlapping claims, making their work more dangerous. The effects of climate change on fisheries include poverty, overfishing due to pollution, ocean warming, as well as ocean acidification. Fishing stocks will dry up, and the livelihoods of fishermen will be affected by low incomes as well as increased danger in the South China Seas. It's often the everyday person that bears the costs of geopolitics. As the region becomes more militarized, the marine environment will also be harmed. The effects of artificial island building has negative effects on the environment, with deep water dredging disturbing the marine environment. There's also the concern of the release of pollution as well as marine debris as more islands are created. Some of these artificial islands sit on formerly thriving coral reefs, noting that China has made efforts to restore some of the coral damage. Noting that China, as we've also saw yesterday with Dr. Sarah Kirchberger noting, the potential for China to deploy up to 20 nuclear plants floating in the South China Seas further impacts the marine environment. The South China Seas is home to 600 coral species, which are negatively impacted by ocean acidification, which slows the growth of corals as well as dredging. These environmental stresses impact the coral reefs, which are vital for fisheries and also food security in the region. The South China Sea is in the Coral Triangle, which, as the ASEAN Maritime Outlook notes, has 76% of the world's coral species. The Maritime Triangle extends across the Southwest Pacific, so it's truly a shared Indo-Pacific resource. Finally, there's ongoing discussions on how sea level rises will impact UNCLOS maritime boundaries. Traveling down to the Pacific Islands, leaders at the 2021 Pacific Island Forum committed to a declaration on preserving maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. Bit of a mouthful for a declaration. The declaration recognises the importance of UNCLOS in determining maritime zones, as well as advocating for fixed maritime boundaries so that they're not reduced to climate-induced territorial erosion. These remain ongoing discussions, but they have the potential to further complicate maritime claims in the South China Seas. Outlining areas of cooperation, environmental issues, including climate change, are one of the few areas where states in the region, particularly the US and China, are continuing to commit despite increasing tensions. Understandings of lawfare, of grey zones, of UNCLOS are often in disputes, but there is a mutual recognition of the key marine concerns in the region. This year, after much negotiation, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, also known as the BBNJ, was ratified by 60 states, Vietnam amongst the first to sign on. The BBNJ emphasises the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. These include genetic resources, marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, capacity building, and marine technology. The High Seas Treaty hopes to fill some of the gaps in conservation in UNCLOS, as well as work alongside UNCLOS. However, there are concerns that late provisions to the treaty will mean that it might not be applied to the South China Sea. Other relevant areas of cooperation include the Peace Through Conservation in the South China Sea and other science diplomacy initiatives which facilitate research and development in the region. There's also an opportunity here for states outside of the South China Sea to support marine environments as well as capacity building. The Australian government has partnerships and programs across the Indo-Pacific, including Southeast Asia, to combat IUU fishing and to support climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as the UK initiatives outlined by the Honourable Anne-Marie Trevelyan yesterday. In terms of energy cooperation, I'm not going to go too in depth. The panelists in session 6 today did a fantastic job to show the ample opportunity, particularly in offshore wind farms in the Indo-Pacific. The ASEAN Maritime Outlook has highlighted the importance of fisheries as well as marine resources, plastic pollution, and marine debris. If extra-regional states are focused on ensuring ASEAN centrality in the free and open Indo-Pacific, ensuring that states are cooperating on the maritime environment is key. Climate change, as we know, is a threat multiplier. Pre-existing political, social, economic, and environmental issues will be exacerbated by climate change. Add to this increasing tensions in the South China Sea, coastal communities in the region are bearing the costs of climate change as well as tension in the South China Sea. As we talk here about the actions of states, it's important to consider those that are experiencing the consequences of tensions in the South China Sea as well as climate change firsthand. The importance of non-traditional security issues in the South China Sea and to protect the marine environment as a means to maintain cooperation and open lines of communication. For the next generation of maritime caretakers and even the current ones, the day-to-day issues are not necessarily conflict in the South China Sea, but it's mitigating the environmental effects of those conflicts as well as climate change. Ensuring that all states are adhering to international law and norms on environmental sustainability, as well as conducting bilateral and multilateral maritime dialogues that are focused on protecting the marine environment, will help to strengthen communication and trust in an increasingly insecure South China Sea and Indo-Pacific. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for reminding us how important is the issue of environmental protection. And in your opinion, it's that threat of environmental degradation is existential for this region and therefore deserve us paying greater attention. Thank you so much for that. Now, I understand that Kate would have to go to the airport right after this, in fact, very soon. So I'd like to give her an opportunity to respond or to for her fellow young leaders to maybe have any questions to her that you'd like her to clarify or to further elaborate on with regard to her very interesting and important ideas. Anyone who would like to have a questions to Kate? Or the fellow leaders? Okay, we have one lady at the back, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate, for your great presentation. And it's my honor to be able to have a dialogue with you, the young people like me. So you mentioned that you want to talk about the environmental issue in the South China Sea from the perspective of an outsider of Southeast Asia region. So my question for you is, so as an outsider, how could Australia contribute to help Southeast Asian country to overcome the environmental issue in the region? Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Yes, Jeff, would you like to ask Kate a question? Just speak on it.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, Kate, especially on the issue of environment. I've noticed that you mentioned that you're an outsider, right? That Australia doesn't have any impact on the South China Sea. I would like to object to that fact. The fact that their presence there as ally of the United States as well as one of the balancing powers in the South China Sea. But however, that is not my question for today. My question is environmental wise. You mentioned about fishing, right? That the South China Sea has over 50% of the world's fishing vessels. Now, amidst the disputed territory here, what you see is that those fishing vessels, they have no regulation to how many fish they catch and therefore resulting in what we call overfishing. Now, do you have any insight, suggestion to the cases of overfishing in the South China Sea? Because as we can say, population growth among all the countries in South China Sea continue to grow. Indonesia itself expects to grow to 300 million in the nearby future. Therefore, that is very much a threat to the food sustainability of the region. That is my question. Thank you.
All right, Kate. So you have two questions there. Would you like to?
All right, thank you so much for the two questions. I'll answer the first one about being an outsider and what Australia can do in the South China Sea. So currently a part of the Australian government's programs include helping with IUU fishing and oceanic research management in the region. But I think one thing that Australia can do is have a more cohesive maritime security strategy. At the moment, our maritime security strategies are quite disparate amongst the Australian government departments. For example, we don't even have a Coast Guard, despite being a very large island in the Indo-Pacific. So I think having a more national security strategy as well as a maritime security strategy will help Australia to understand the environmental effects of maritime security in the region and linking in that with climate change, as well as the further work that we've been doing in the region in terms of oceanic research management, assisting with IUU fishing, skills building, training, and also in track 1.5 and 2 dialogues as well. And to the question about Australia not having an impact in the South China Seas, I definitely don't agree. I think that we do have an impact as a middle power in the region, and as you highlighted, on certain issues as well. In terms of fishing rights and overfishing, it's not one of my main areas of expertise, but it is going to increase in also in terms of overpopulation in the region as well. As populations increases, we're going to need more fish stocks, but those fish stocks will be simultaneously depleting due to environmental degradation as well as ocean warming in the region.
Thank you very much, Kate. Yes, please, Karen.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Regarding Jeff's question on the matter of overfishing, I would like to point out existing efforts to address this issue. Usually what we do is we conduct joint patrols considering the vast expanse of waters in the South China Sea. And I remember Nico and I were talking about this very particular issue yesterday. There was an agreement by the Philippines and China, I think it was signed last year, to conduct joint patrols, although the scope was not yet defined, and negotiations are currently being held to discuss the scope, whether it involves defense and security, or it could also involve environmental management concerns. And this is also where regional fisheries management organizations can also come into play. RFMOs, as we call them in short, usually focus on high-value fish stocks, such as tuna. And so that gives much economic incentives for countries to pursue joint cooperation on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I don't want to keep Kate for too long, so she would be late for her flight. So please join me in thanking Kate and give her a round of applause of congratulations. Thank you very much, and looking forward to welcoming you back to our future South China Sea conferences. Now let's move on to Mr. Jeff Basin, University of Brawijaya, Indonesia. You have the floor.
Selamat sore, everyone, Your Excellencies and diplomats and experts present in this room. I am right now wearing my batik, so therefore you already know that I'm from Indonesia already. Firstly, I would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for inviting me to this conference. This is my very first time in Vietnam, and it's been a great experience so far. Quite reminds me of my old hometown. Traffic, hawkers everywhere. It reminds me of Jakarta. All right, now let's begin with the introduction. My name is Cipaya Basen. I'm a graduate of International Relations of University of Brawijaya. Just recently graduated. I've done contract works, especially as a linguist and communication specialist, ranging from 194 FAR with the US Army, then 17 ARC, 13 MIU during joint exercises in Indonesia. Those are brief professional experience, and therefore I specialize in mostly in the study of security. Right now, so far, though, in the conference, we've studied so far about, yes, we know about the great powers having an impact on the South China Sea. We also know that there are lawfare and cases surrounding that. The fact that lawfare is very much being, was very intensely discussed, whether or not there should be law on lawfare, where every army actually have a group of legal teams. So basically, lawfare is already part of being a lawyer. And lastly, about the sustainability of the infrastructure in the South China Sea is very much being under debate. Those were very insightful so far. Right. So what I'm bringing right now here is that I'm addressing traditional and non-traditional threats in the SCS. So basically, it's about brief enactions in strengthening ASEAN on the SCS dispute. So let's move on to the first about history first, because history is so we can move it. All right. So first of all, history is an important aspect when we understand about South China Sea. It's often being missed, but we already know so far that historically the South China Sea was dominated by Chinese dynasty from Ming to Qing up until the 19th century during the age of colonization. Now, when this claim began, the dispute began, is that I drew the line where the end of World War II, when we saw that the surrender of the Japanese troops in the Paracel and Spratlys were secured by the ROC. They drew their firstly 11 dash line around the area. But at the time, they did not have enough naval power to have a presence there at the time because of their involvement in the Civil War. And afterwards, the victorious PRC turned that into a 9-dash line. Now, when we move on to the matters of claims currently that is based on the traditional fishing ground, it's now very under dispute because it's not according to the UNCLOS where it's always 200 miles up until the outside of the coast or outside of the islands of a particular nation. So that's the very much interferes with the EEZs of multiple nations in the area, causing disputes. And lastly, there are numerous clashes and intense coast guards. We can call this a gray zone coast guard patrols around the Spratlys and sea states around the area having outposts, therefore causing, as always, many clashes that very much impede with the solution, diplomatic solutions that's ongoing. All right, now next. Now, here, in session 1, Dr. Nguyen mentioned about current generation having access to what we call OSINT. It's open source intelligence. This is what from CSIS is AMTI, one of which shows that the militarization of the Spratlys here is about the Fury Cross. As we can see right now, the Fury Cross Reef has the capacity of ISR, or Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, and C3, or Command, Control, and Communications. As we can see, the presence of Kilo Juliet 500 in the map there on this side, as you can see. On the lower side, it's not wings, and it's KG500 and Y8Q. And as well as that, there's a presence of intelligence ship as well, and this makes it that Fury Cross Reef is probably one of the most central presence of Chinese military in the Spratly Islands. Second is this militarized island. So this is taken from CSIS MTI as well. First of all, we discuss about the Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Quarton Reef. Mischief Reef and Subi Reef has already been discussed by Dr. Sarah in session 2 as well. She mentioned about having ISR assets, particularly radar radomes, and in particular intelligent asset being there. And Quarton Reef, in addition, is very much a support facility with ISR equipment located there as always a radar. So this pretty much makes it PRC sea lines of communications as well as the supporting logistical reef to their presence there. Now, the problem being that what I want to highlight is one of dispute in the Scarborough Shoal in 2020. As we can see right now, the presence of 3 gray zones coast guards against several Filipino fishermen. However, I do not want to discuss this more because another participant has already laid claim to the discussion on this. So the general considerations are that we have the militarization of Spratly that presents a traditional threat in the South China Sea. Second, we have salami slicing tactics. So what is salami? Salami is basically a big sausage, and then you pull little bit. You have bits, and then you get the whole sausage without having to pay for it. So the tactic basically a group of small actions being done over time to lay claim into a large area. And this has been done by nations in the past, and right now it's currently being done in the South China Sea. Thirdly, we have conflicted sea lines of communications. As I stated before, the Spratly Islands, Paracel Islands, they form sea lines of communications, and they interfere with or countries' EEZs, for example, Vietnam and Philippines. So it's very much a conflicted area, and as well as conflicted sea lines of communication. Lastly, what is all this cost? So all this only have effect in that they put seed of mistrust in the diplomatic negotiations. As we can see right now, we have already agreed that first we agreed that code of conduct should be complete by now, I think. But now it's been extended that there should be an agreement on the acceleration of the completion of the COC, therefore bringing it to 2026. So pretty much extending deadlines after deadlines in the middle of diplomatic deadlock that is currently happening with all the mistrust between states in the South China Sea. Now, those are the traditional security threats we are facing, but non-traditional security matters too. In fact, it matters to a lot of us. Do we fit ourselves from having guns, from having security threat from protection? No, but we are complementing ourselves with fishes, with food, with water, with health as well. So this pretty much was a non-traditional security threats. So this thought began in the post-Cold War. As we can see, back then the Soviet Union collapsed and the US was a global hegemony. So many thought that oh, war is inadequate, and there were IR rebels as well. So they move on from the theory of having two world domination to a new form of non-traditional security that were plaguing in the area. So what I'm bringing right now is that non-traditional threats may exist concurrently or in causality with traditional threats, for example, wars, conflict, etc. In many cases, if traditional threats were not given solutions for, this non-traditional threat can only expand so far and will only cause it to not be addressed. For example, we have the humanitarian crisis in 1993 Somalia because of the threat that were unaddressed there. It hasn't been addressed. And the 1958 Lebanon, I'm sorry, it's written as 1956, should be 1958, and 1982 Lebanon, where we saw conflicts there that prevent humanitarian crisis and relief. The situation in the South China Sea may not be an exception. If you do not address the big problem or the big elephant in the room, how can we address the small fries around it? So that's pretty much a big problem right now. Now, this non-traditional threat that I'm discussing about is about overfishing. As we can see in the left map, over 60% of all the fishing zones in the South China Sea are now depleted. This is in 2016, and pretty much by 2023, there has been an increasing number of depleted fishing zones. So the catches have all been decreased as well, from about 35 to 40 million tons in 2005 to now below 30 million tons annually by every state. So in response to this, China has actually implemented a correct solution here. However, it's been quite selective fishing ban in disputed territories because this has been in effect since 1999, and it affects all fishing zones above the 12th parallel. So the fishing ban was supposed to help fish regenerate in those fishing areas, so give time fish to breed. But the problem being that this selective ban is only in effect from one country, so it's unilateral, not multilateral. So the problem being that the solution cannot be implemented to anyone. This is also more complex because, as Kate was saying, that overfishing was actually caused by climate change and pole-centric migration of fish. Why? Because the depleted fishing zone is not all from overfishing. Some fish go south. The more warm it is, they go south. They go near the pole. So this is making it very hard for fishermen to catch their fish and making it more likely for them to be in conflict with neighboring states. Now, so we have three key issues right now we have to address. First, we have encroaching militarization of the South China Sea and EEZ violations of sea members, as per UNCLOS, of course. Second, we have non-violent clashes between Coast Guard and fishermen to unclear agreed boundaries, and as well as gray zone operations. Last but not least is depleted fishing zones in the northern SCS due to overfishing, threatening food sustainability and therefore food security. Now, recommended actions. What I see so far is that we must finish first the code of conduct. So basically, code of conduct will be the guidelines to how we solve crises in the South China Sea. We need to work together with China and every nation in ASEAN in order to push this, in order to be complete before 2026. That's the pretty much optimistic deadline. Second of all, we must push to agreed upon fishing quotas. At least that solution so far will be explored by my fellow young leaders as well on the possibility of fishing quota and how it is being done by multilateralism as well. Last but not least is that we must strengthen our ties, regional ties, armed force ties through joint exercises between armed forces in ASEAN, because it's very much increasing the confidence in ASEAN, as in session 1 and session 2 mentioned that the speakers were talking about the lack of confidence, the lack of optimism in ASEAN. So this can be fixed through confidence building measures like that. We can invite other countries as well. As indicated in ASEX 2023, just last September, it's basically joint exercise between armed forces in ASEAN, however, only on humanitarian affairs only. So the main purpose of which three-pronged actions is to tackle traditional threats concurrently with non-traditional threats, which, as far in my opinion, seems fit. All right, I believe that's my presentations for now, and I believe that the others will have other things to say as well. So I'll see you all in the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Another staunch reminder of the need to tackle both non-traditional as well as traditional security issues at the same time. And you offered three very specific recommendations on how ASEAN can take this forwards. So thank you. If you have any questions, save it to the end because all these four young leaders are going to stay with us to the end of the program. So let me invite the next speaker, Mr. Nicolas Antonio, University of the Philippines.
Hello. Your Excellencies, Your Honors, distinguished guests, fellow delegates, and friends, Shin Chao, magandang hapon. I'm Nicolas Antonio, a law student and researcher from the University of the Philippines, and it is with great honor that I address you today to share some insights and learnings from the past 2 days of meaningful dialogue and collaboration in the 15th South China Sea International Conference. Allow me first to express my immense gratitude to the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for giving me the opportunity to participate in this conference, which has been enlightening, to say the least. I would be remiss if I did not take this chance to thank Dr. Vu Haidang, Hindo, and Ngoc Mai for their guidance and support. Maraming salamat. My presentation today will revolve around the Philippine experience in asserting our legal rights and entitlements over the West Philippine Sea, our maritime territory which forms part of the larger South China Sea. As Dr. J. Batongbakal and Commodore J. Torriella discussed in their respective presentations earlier, our country is engaged in a heated dispute over the South China Sea region, almost the entirety of which is claimed by the People's Republic of China based on their supposed historical rights. Let me point out first that no one wants war. We abhor war. Our Constitution itself expressly provides the Philippines renounces war as an instrument of national policy. It is a non sequitur argument to say that asserting our legal rights over the West Philippine Sea is an invitation, much less a declaration of war. It is precisely conferences like this where we are given the extraordinary opportunity to exchange ideas instead of gunfire, where our words may sometimes clash, but grateful still that they do, instead of our warm bodies. It is in this spirit that the Philippines filed an arbitration case against the People's Republic in 2013, pursuant to Annex 7 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or UNCLOS. This has been repeatedly cited all throughout this conference, starting from Professor Carl Thayer's engaging discussion on the long and difficult journey surrounding the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct negotiations. So allow me now to re-emphasize the most important rulings and implications of the arbitral award. First, the 9-dash line has no legal basis under UNCLOS and is invalid. The disputed area falls within the Philippines exclusive economic zone since under the definition of UNCLOS, there are no islands in the disputed region. Third, and probably the most relevant for fellow students of the law, the arbitral award is now part of international law pursuant to the ICJ statute. The arbitral award's most immediate impact was the invalidation of China's 9-dash line, which has recently evolved into a 10-dash line through the most recently published map of China's Ministry of Natural Resources. This demarcation, which China used to claim vast expanses of the South China Sea, clashed with UNCLOS, which China ratified in 1996 and even participated in the negotiations of. The arbitral award clarified that the 9-dash line lacked legal basis and that maritime entitlements must be determined by the provisions of UNCLOS and not by the supposed historical rights raised by the People's Republic. While this ruling was a significant victory for the Philippines, it has also deepened tensions between China and its neighbors, as Beijing staunchly rejected the legitimacy of the decision, due in part to China's decision to refuse to participate in the proceedings. Another crucial aspect of the arbitral award is the assertion that no declared islands existed within the disputed region, placing it squarely within the Philippines Exclusive Economic Zone or EEZ. This recognition reinforced the Philippines' rights over natural resources, fisheries, and economic activities within the zone. However, enforcing these rights has proven to be a complex task as China continues its expansive territorial claims and militarization efforts in the South China Sea, disregarding the award and exacerbating regional tensions, as Commodore Torriella discussed at length earlier today. Now, I would also like to note that the impact of the arbitral award extends beyond the immediate parties involved. It is now considered part of international law pursuant to the provision flashed on the screen. This recognition underscores the significance of the arbitral award in establishing legal precedents for resolving maritime disputes and upholding the already agreed upon principles and provisions of UNCLOS. At this point, I would like to attempt to reframe the discussion a little bit and tackle the plight of Filipino fisherfolk, the second most impoverished sector in our country. Filipino fisherfolk who rely heavily on the South China Sea for their livelihoods have been unduly affected adversely by the territorial dispute. Incursions by Chinese vessels into contested waters have resulted in reduced access to traditional fishing grounds, often leading to economic hardship, food insecurity, and even displacement for these communities. Their struggles have been exacerbated by the limited capacity of the Philippine government to protect their rights and interests in the face of a powerful and assertive neighbor. Addressing the plight of Filipino fisherfolk is not only a matter of humanitarian concern, but it is also a legal imperative. The arbitral award serves as a foundation for asserting the rights of these fisherfolk. It is crucial to utilize this legal framework to advocate for their access to resources and to ensure that they can continue their livelihoods in a sustainable and secure manner. So recently, a Filipino fisherman aboard a tiny wooden boat taunted a Chinese vessel near the Scarborough Shoal, which Jeff discussed earlier. This brought widespread cheers for his extraordinary act of defiance. He was interviewed by a journalist after. Asked why he undertook such a dangerous stunt, he responded with, "Pinagtatawanan ko lang sila. I just laughed at them." Truly, the Filipino humor can still persist in front of the largest maritime militia and the largest navy in the world. Reframing the South China Sea issue to accommodate the plight of impoverished Filipinos, fisherfolk, necessitates a multi-pronged approach. Firstly, the Philippine government, with international support, must bolster its capacity to protect the rights of its fisherfolk, including through enhanced military surveillance, maritime surveillance, law enforcement, and diplomatic initiatives. Additionally, regional cooperation is critical, as neighboring countries should work together to establish mechanisms that safeguard the interests of vulnerable fishing communities. Furthermore, diplomatic efforts should be intensified to encourage China to adhere to international law and respect the rights of all nations in the South China Sea. This includes constructive dialogues, confidence building measures, and negotiations aimed at finding mutually acceptable solutions that prioritize the interests of all stakeholders, particularly the poorest of the poor and those in the margins. I end this with a quote from one of our country's most eminent legal scholars. This battle to defend our EEZ from China, the superpower in our region, is the 21st century equivalent of the battles that our forebears waged against Western and Eastern colonizers from the 16th to 20th century. In this historic battle to secure our EEZ, we must rely on the most powerful weapon invented by man in the settlement of disputes among states. A weapon that can immobilize armies, neutralize aircraft carriers, render irrelevant nuclear bombs, and level the battlefield between small nations and superpowers. That weapon, the great equalizer, is the rule of law. Under the rule of law, right prevails over might. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all in the journey towards a more peaceful, a more just, and a more humane international community grounded in the rule of law.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Antonio, for reminding us the significance of the historical arbitrage ruling on the South China Sea, the first and only one of its kind. Especially a reminder that such a resolution is through peaceful means, a very important conclusion. So thank you very much. And now let me invite Ms. Karen C., Partnership in Environmental Management for the Seas of East Asia, to the floor.
Honorable Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Karen C., also from the Philippines, as Nico here. My specialization is on coastal and marine resource management sustainability. My academic background is in sustainable economics, and I serve as the former Secretariat Coordinator of Partnerships in Environmental Management for the Seas of East Asia, an intergovernmental organization that focuses on the promotion of sustainable ocean economy-related initiatives in the Asia and Pacific, including those bordering the South China Sea. And I also serve as a coastal and marine focal person for the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippine government, the central planning ministry of the country. I'm very thrilled to be a part of the Young Leaders Program of this year's installation of the South China Sea Annual Conference, which I agree with the organizers needs active participation from as many sectors and fields as possible. For this reason, I would like to thank DAV of Vietnam for giving me this opportunity to join everyone here. I will be presenting some recommendations in terms of prospective priority studies for marine scientific research, or MSR, in the South China Sea in the context of environmental management. A topic that, if you notice, lacks or rather pales in comparison compared to other South China Sea related dialogues that mostly revolve around sovereignty, sovereign rights, defense, security, and other traditional issues related to foreign policy. For this reason too, actually, I'm very pleased to see growing interest in this field of environmental management, as we saw from the earlier presentations and even the ones yesterday. I will not delve anymore on the environmental significance of the South China Sea, as this was already more or less covered in the conference. But I will say that marine scientific research is important, as it places a key source of information for building maritime domain awareness, or MDA, which refers to the comprehensive understanding and knowledge of activities, developments, and threats in the maritime domain and associated airspace. Something that, as was mentioned yesterday, is very limited, but nevertheless needed, especially in a complex, high-stakes area such as the South China Sea. Now, I'm very Asian, so I need to step down from the podium. Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, to set the context for my presentation and also in consideration of the time limit, I'll be focusing on 3 examples of under-researched yet high-impact areas of marine scientific research. These recommendations are based on needs capacity assessments done by countries, think tanks, and international organizations such as PEMC. Now, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, nor a prescriptive list, but rather a snapshot. And so I encourage others to share their ideas later during the Q&A. Apologies in advance if I don't have any presentation. First, I would like to start with a recommendation that is something already familiar for all of you: climate change. If you may recall, climate change is the most pressing environmental issue worldwide, as it has severe repercussions, which do not recognize any legal and administrative boundaries, and is particularly felt in developing vulnerable countries such as those in the South China Sea. In 2021, we had what was mentioned yesterday, a landmark achievement under the UN Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, namely the adoption of the Glasgow Climate Pact that recognized the inextricable link between the ocean and climate change, and decided to embed the field of ocean-related solutions, which is actually a key driver for climate change mitigation, in the multilateral climate change regime. This is a fitting time, considering that in the context of greenhouse gas reduction targets and commitments of countries under the UNFCCC, the potential of ocean-related industries for climate change mitigation are barely considered, unlike their land counterparts, with the exception of offshore renewable energy. This is where greenhouse gas accounting for the maritime transport sector comes into the picture, and this is my first recommendation out of the three. 9 out of the 10 busiest seaports in the world, and about 60% of the world's maritime trade goes through the South China Sea. Additionally, China and our neighboring countries, Japan and South Korea, account for 93% of global shipbuilding in terms of weight. Considering the high industrial activity in maritime transport, it is important to produce baseline estimates of the greenhouse gas emissions of this sector to aid policymakers in greening the industry and updating the greenhouse gas reduction targets of their respective countries. There are no large-scale estimates yet for the maritime transport industry, but we do know that the transport sector as a whole produces 23% of total greenhouse gas emissions, according to rough estimates by GIZ. In view of this, I'm very pleased to inform you that during the last East Asian Seas Congress in 2021, held in hybrid format in Cambodia and online organized by PAMC, we were able to secure country commitments from the countries of Cambodia, China, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam to participate in the Blue Solutions project of GIZ, whose main outputs are to conduct greenhouse gas accounting of the maritime transport industry in these countries and to fund pilot infrastructure or other investment projects. Now, my second recommendation is the conduct of a feasibility study for risk insurance for coral reefs, which provide a number of ecosystem services such as marine species nursery and feeding grounds, storm surge protection, erosion control, and greenhouse gas reduction. However, damage from severe climatic events such as tropical cyclones or hurricanes, as you call it in other places, poses a significant threat to coral reef ecosystems. One study found that in the presence of Category 4 cyclones or winds with at least 110 knots, coral reefs can already lose an average of 25% of live coral cover. Live coral cover, by the way, refers to the proportion of the reef surface covered by live stony coral, which are the main building blocks of coral reef structure. And this can even get destroyed up to 60% in Category 5 cyclones or winds with 160 knots. In some regions, damage from these events is the greatest, shortest term risk that reefs face. As such, the establishment of risk insurance is a necessity for these fragile ecosystems. The establishment of a risk insurance involves assessing first if there is a need for insurance, followed by the identification of prospective buyers and investors, designing the insurance model, developing the necessary institutional arrangements, and building the inventory of funds. A successful pilot initiative on risk insurance for coral reefs has been conducted in Quintana Roo, Mexico. Here, the Nature Conservancy NGO, Swiss Re Insurance Company, and the local government and hotel industry have partnered together to ensure a stretch of the Mesoamerican reef and adjacent beaches to protect coastal businesses and thousands of livelihoods dependent on tourism and fishing. Underlying the success of this model is a Coastal Zone Management Trust Fund, an innovative financial mechanism developed to promote good governance, increase transparency, and ensure that the insurance policy is properly funded. The trust was established in November 2018 and has purchased a reef insurance policy. The trust receives revenues from a tourism tax collected by the government from hotel owners and other beachfront property owners to be used in part to pay the insurance policy premiums or indemnity payments, and to conduct overall management of the coastal zone, ensuring funding both during disaster response and for ongoing reef and beach maintenance. An example in which this was successful was the case of Hurricane Delta, which hit the coast of Mexico in October 2020, 2 years after the insurance model was established. This triggered the insurance policy and led to the world's first ever coral reef insurance payout. The payout totaled USD 850,000, and this will be used to restore the reef. According to a rapid assessment of the Nature Conservancy, the same NGO which conducted the earlier study on the insurance model, coral reef insurance markets might be feasible in multiple countries, including those in the Asia Pacific. Zeroing in on the South China Sea, the analysis points to Indonesia and the Philippines as these countries are highly vulnerable, have extensive reefs, and will benefit the greatest in terms of the number of people it can protect and the value of property protected by coral reefs. Now, as of writing, a regional project of the ADB aims to conduct a feasibility study for risk insurance for coral reefs in these two countries, plus Fiji and Solomon Islands in the Pacific. Now, my last recommendation is research on marine genetic resources. And I apologize in advance, I might delay the discussion for a little bit. Now, this research on marine genetic resources, including those found within the EEZ and high seas, to check their viability for biotechnological application, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, where there is high demand and economic incentive for cooperation. This is very important considering the economic incentives involved, as mentioned. Now, the development of pharmaceuticals from marine sources is not new, especially those within territorial waters. In fact, back in the late 1960s, and the shallow water sponge was the source of chemicals that led to the development of an anti-leukemia drug, and subsequently, in the 1980s, the HIV drug. Similarly, the venom of the conch shell resulted in the development of a synthetic compound used in a painkiller. Antifreeze proteins from cold water fish and other organisms are used to improve the quality of frozen processed products. We also have remdesivir, which I'm sure you've already heard. This is an antiviral treatment for COVID-19, and this was derived from sea sponges. These are just a few examples of the ingenious applications of marine genetic resources, a key ingredient in human health and safety with global implications. The prospect for marine genetic resources in the high seas is even higher, as it makes up 64% of the ocean surface and nearly 95% of the ocean's volume. They are rich in biological diversity, proven to be an important source of novel genes and natural products, and remains barely explored. However, it should be noted that any such research should follow the safeguards put in place, if any, by countries with jurisdictional rights, such as the case in EEZ, or the safeguard provisions in the BBNJ Treaty that was already mentioned a couple of times in this conference, once it has been ratified by 60 countries or the 60 UN member states. These safeguards are meant to help ensure the sustainable development of these resources and the equitable distribution of genetic resources. Why is this important? The topic of equitable distribution is especially a key issue as a single transnational corporation alone by the name of BASF, the world's largest chemical manufacturer, headquartered in Germany, had registered 47% of all genetic patents worldwide. Not only did this company register more patent sequences than the other 220 companies, but it also exceeded the second and third companies, the leading companies, by a huge margin. Japanese firm Kyowa Hakko Kirin Company Limited, which is standing at 5.3%, and US-based Butamax Advanced Biofuels LLC at 3.4%. Imagine the huge discrepancy. I am pleased to note that as of writing, many of the countries in the South China Sea have signed the BBNJ Treaty, namely China, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, currently in the process of ratifying this treaty. And so we hope we can change this scenario. And that concludes the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for raising the topic of marine scientific research with three very specific recommendations on greenhouse emission from marine transport, from coral reef protection, and also marine genetic research. These are very interesting ideas, and I hope we can delve more into it in the Q&A. So thank you very much. And last but not least, let's welcome a Vietnamese young leader, and her name is Ms. Nguyen Trinh Tâm Hiền from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam.
Your Excellency, honorable ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all the distinguished guests, and thank you all for staying to the very last presentation. My name is Nguyễn Trịnh Tâm Hiền, the senior student at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, majoring in international politics and diplomacy. First and foremost, please kindly allow me to send my warmest congratulations to the DAV on the 15th anniversary of the South China Sea Conference. I would also like to express my deeper gratitude to the organizing committee for providing me such a great opportunity to be a part of the Young Leaders Program and participate this year conference on site. Throughout the previous working session, I've learned so much about the current situation in the South China Sea, and it will profoundly impress me to see the tremendous quiet efforts and contributions of numerous politicians, diplomats, researchers, and all the forces from relevant countries. Distinguished panelists also provided a comprehensive picture of the South China Sea with complicated development in various relations, fields, and domains to be further particularized, as well as good practices from other regions. So, amid escalating competition and tension, it is necessary for littoral state, landlocked nation, and external partner to seek solution to enhance cooperation in such less sensitive field as marine conservation, marine scientific research, as Karen said, as a sustainable exploitation, and etc. Through collaboration in the South China Sea, ASEAN member states could reinforce solidarity and unity among themselves, as well as an institution. Of our sector, clean energy has emerged as one of the most potential fields surrounding the South China Sea to be further developed. In the following presentation, I put forward a SWOT analysis to explain the prospect of solar, wind, and wind energy cooperation among littoral state and regional country. And then based on that foundation, I would go on proposing a 4-level roadmap to promote an intra-region and collaboration and beyond, with ASEAN at the central position. Sorry. Let's move on to the very first part, the strength of Southeast Asia member nation. Okay, here. You can see that first of all, geographical location create favorable condition to generate clean energy. Located in a monsoonal tropical region encircling the semi-cloud China Sea, most ASEAN member states get high exposure to sunlight and wind all year round. Geographically, proximity also facilitate great connection between countries to form a joint market. Second, except for Cambodia and the Philippines, the majority of nations attended the conference of UNFCCC party and pledged to reduce emission by 2050 or 2065. Following that, domestic legal and regulatory framework are being improved and completed in compliance with the pledge, taking Vietnam issuing the 8 National Power Development Plan that were thoroughly introduced to the conference by Dr. Nguyễn Xuân Huy this morning, for example. Thirdly, because of ASEAN's rising population and highly concentrated economic activity, energy security is of existential importance for both intra-regional country and external factors of which interests are closely linked to ASEAN. Along the way of green transition, Southeast Asian countries also face opportunities from outer conjuncture. First of all, amid decreasing fossil fuel reserve and turbulent global conjuncture, green transition and sustainable development are irreversible on a global scale. And in the era of power competition, ASEAN's neutrality and centrality are highly appreciated as they ensure an open, stable, and equal playground to cooperate with all good-willing external partners. And as such, ASEAN will keep maintaining warm and stable relation with all dialogue partners, including great power, also as well as TAC signing parties would have advantages on clean transition, such as Denmark, United Arab Emirates, or Qatar. Big countries are determined to gather force and launch initiatives that aim at attracting small and medium-sized countries in Southeast Asia. For example, back to 2022, the U.S. announced the IPEF illuminating green transition as one of the important pillars, and 6 out of ASEAN countries participate in this framework. Most recently, Beijing organized the Belt and Road Forum, emphasizing green development as one of the new focuses of the 10 years old initiative. However, every sword had two sides, and with increasing pressure from power rivalry, ASEAN member nations may be forced to take side. Together with territorial dispute, power tension in the South China Sea, destabilize the region, erodes strategic trust, and hinder cooperation between parties. Second of all, as you know, China has retained its position as the world leading manufacturer of solar energy products and global solar cell manufacturing. To guarantee that it satisfies the demand of the green transition, China also dominated the global supply chain for raw material for production and manufacturing process. According to the table on the screen, you can see that China's companies accounting for roughly 70% of total world rare earth element output. And in this context, it would be challenging for ASEAN to penetrate the field. The future looks even dimmer given ASEAN primeval weaknesses as follow. First of all, regular severe natural disaster as well as vulnerability to climate change significantly accumulate human, social, and economic costs. Secondly, limitation in capital, technology, and human resource hamper ASEAN member states from mastering cutting-edge technology. And another point to take into account is that although ASEAN's slogan is unity in diversity, but sometimes diversion in terms of natural condition and development strategy may impede intra-regional collaboration. And on the basis of aforementioned analysis, I would like to suggest a 4-level roadmap to boost cooperation within ASEAN member states and beyond in terms of clean energy. With the vision of ensure intra-regional energy demand, and in the long run, ASEAN could become a regional clean energy hub. So these are four levels on the roadmap I want to recommend. First of all, national level, multilateral level, ASEAN level, and ASEAN Plus level. So first, on national level, Southeast Asian nations should continue and accelerate the work of completion, legal and regulatory framework, create open policy, environment, and investment to attract cooperation. Second, on multilateral level, this is the backbone of my plan, because neighboring country or those of common concern could increase dialogue and consultation for better mutual understanding on natural conditions and capabilities of each other country. This dialogue elaborates on initiative of energy investment, cooperation, and trading contract. The ASEAN map as below show us a great potential of cooperation between reciprocal supplement and economy. You can see on the map that Singapore and Brunei, wealthy as they are due to their small size of territory, still dependent on imported energy. On the contrary, Vietnam, with a long coastline and having huge prospect in generating offshore energy, is questing qualified capital and technology investment. So the confluence of those three country demand and capacity result in a trilateral ministerial meeting on the sideline of the IPAP in the US last year. And the wind farm in Laos set another good example of a landlocked country with wind energy potential that based the very first cross-border renewable energy project in the ASEAN area, involving firms from Philippines, Hong Kong, and so on. Following the Paris cooperative norm, these multilateral blocs could go on proposing a collaboration at the ASEAN level, aiming at Southeast Asian common energy industry and market. Despite its diversity in the past decade, ASEAN always managed to promote the lowest common denominator among its member states, which promote the economic development and mitigate the effect of climate change. So with geographic proximity as an advantage, ASEAN should continue to promote the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation and increase the institutionality and effectiveness of ASEAN Center for Energy to establish a shared energy market based on the aforementioned underpinnings. A unified ASEAN is no doubt a strong actor on the regional and global stage, creating leverage in negotiating with external partners on the four level of ASEAN Plus. So on the one hand, with self-reliant capabilities strengthened via intra-ASEAN cooperation, solidarity, and mutual support, ASEAN can welcome the participation of external partners with confidence. When the 10 nations stand together on the same side, it's far easier and simpler to build mutual beneficial relationship with large powers than when each country act alone. And on the other hand, ASEAN Center cooperation will be a factor stabilizing the region, strengthening trust between countries, and promote the principle of consultation, dialogue, and mutual beneficial cooperation for peace, stability surrounding the South China Sea or the ASEAN Way in short, in other key areas as well. And that's marked the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention and support.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Nguyen, for another presentation on how ASEAN can play its central role this time on a very important issue with regard to lighting up the greens, and that is clean transformation. And you offered a very concrete 4 steps approach on how ASEAN can get there. So thank you very much. Now we have wonderful 5 presentations on a wide-ranging topics, all related to the maritime domains, and all are very futuristic. So, well, I'm very impressed with your presentation, and we don't have much time left though. So I would like to open the floor for maybe you yourself to interact or have any questions among yourself, or if we in the audience have any questions or any comments on their wonderful presentation. So I see 1 hand from the audience, 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands. Oh my God. We really are re-energized after the 4 presentations. So I'd like to give a chance to the audience first. Ambassador Zhang.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all congratulate DAV for having this special session. I believe the new session has provided not only new air, new spirit, but also new vitality to the series of South China Sea International Conference. The second congratulations go to the 5 panelists. They have proven that they are not just serious researchers, but also visionary thinkers. Now, let me have 1 question. My question goes to Antonio. I understand that July this year marks the 7th anniversary of the ruling of the arbitral tribunal. It is also in July this year that your Department of Foreign Affairs, for the first time, launched a website to publicize all the documents related to the ruling. My question is, why or what does the launch after 7 years without it tell you? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. You can respond.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. I'd like to address this issue, the elephant in the room. For the past administration in the Philippines, under President Rodrigo Duterte, there was an exchange. We acquiesced, we kept quiet as a country, supposedly in exchange for developmental assistance from China. So you would see a notable acquiescence and silence during the administration of President Duterte. There was no mention of this very important ruling in most diplomatic occasions. Unfortunately, now the Foreign Ministry of the Philippines is now more proactive in trying to enforce the arbitral ruling. So that answers your question. And yeah, so we can't do anything about the past administration, but we can now, we just have to move forward with what we have right now.
Thank you so much. And another questions? Yeah, there are two from the back. Murray, sorry, you have to hold on. There are two ladies in the back who have raised their hand before you. All right, one by one. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I want to congratulations to all 5 young panelists for successfully deliver your outstanding idea. So I have a really quick questions for Jeff. So basically, you have mentioned the non-traditional security issue in the South China Sea, and but I haven't heard you mention much about the non-state factors, and I believe that this factor also have very relationship with the states as well, especially with space for territorial purposes. So I'm asking you whether you have any comments on these non-traditional, non-state factors in the concept of non-traditional security as well as traditional security, and also the legal framework related to the non-state factors in the maritime issue. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Maybe you can pass the mic to your neighbor to also pose a question.
Thank you so much. I also have a question to Mr. Jeff. So in your presentation, you mentioned a bit of history that the South China Sea was historically dominated by the Qing dynasty to the 19th century. So in my opinion, when we talk about history, and every time we bring up any historical assumption, it means that we, aka like what we, with our assumption on what happened in the past, then every time we mention any historical assumption, there underlies some implication or significant, and it could, it could lead us to interpret the past and the present in a different way. So it is very important, like, to pay attention to the details when you talk about history. So therefore, I want to ask you, what is the significance of the fact when you mention the historical domination of the Qing dynasty on the South China Sea, and what does it mean? Because the South China Sea is very big, and there are so many small area and fragmented area, and there are so different period of time that different group of people dominate the sea. So why do you mention that, and what is the significance of it? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Murray would like to have your question too.
I have a somewhat different question. So I want to go to the foundation of our whole conversation here, the last 2 days. I sometimes hear from some of the countries represented here among this excellent young panel that why should we, China's got a huge military. There's not that much in the South China Sea, a bunch of rocks, only a few fish left, and maybe, maybe some oil and gas, and some rare earths maybe. But so I hear the argument from young people sometimes, look, we're a poor country, we need infrastructure, we need education, we need, on and on. And now our militaries are spending a lot of money to modernize and build up, and they will never be able to stop China and defeat China. So I want to ask you, where you guys, few of you come out on this equation of, protecting the South China Sea, maintaining interest in the South China Sea, or giving it to the Chinese and developing your own economies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I assume that question goes to any or all of the. Thank you so much. All right, who would like to pick any questions? Jeff, you have 2 questions, so would you like to respond? Yes, please, go ahead. Just speak onto the mic. It's going to turn on. Just speak onto it.
That's. Oh, all right. So 2 questions, 2 very interesting questions indeed. That's why I put it on the PowerPoint, so it attracts some questions. Why I simplified those large historical significance. There has been about, since the start of mankind, there has been people in South China Sea, and there has been change of power who ruled the South China Sea. Why I simplified to the Ming and Qing only. And second question is from Mai over there. I think Mai is asking about the non-state actor in South China Sea. Well, that is very interesting. I didn't get the chance to speak about that because 12-minute limitations. It's very much interesting. However, I'll talk about the second question first because it's very interesting historical wise. So why historical factor is so important to be discussed about? That's the basis of the question. Countries laid claims not only based on the geographic, but also historical significance sometimes. That's why Indonesia has that claim against the Philippines. The Philippines has that claim against Indonesia, and both of us have had claims against Malaysia, especially the Sultanate of Sulu. Because historically, Sulu in North Borneo has been either a part of Nusantara, and we had records of Majapahit having colonies there, and it has been a part of the Philippines as well. So that's why the Sultanate of Sulu faced rebellion in 2013, I think. Yeah, it was close to my home, so they bombed a lot of Sulu rebels over there. Right now, let's get to the point. So to answer your question, the first question, history sets a precedence to states' claims, and I stand by that. Judging by the historical claims, for example, Indonesia, why did Indonesia exist in the first place? When you look over history, Indonesia consists of many kingdoms. We have the Majapahit, we have the Mula Warman, we have Sultanate of Aceh, we have the separate kingdoms in Maluku, we have kingdoms in Sulawesi, and all of these have distinct languages, and all of these have different identities. So why history is important? Because one thing, history unites the nations. We were under-colonized by the Dutch, and I'm saying this as the official version. That's why our states are united. So history sets precedence to state, and it sets the basis of identity of a state. So it is very important so that we can understand the perspective of one state claiming the almost entirety of South China Sea. So we can understand that. And why didn't I mention about any other state other than the Ming and Qing? Well, there's a lot. If I mention about the history of Vietnamese as well, it's very interesting that you have emperors as well, and Vietnamese empire basically exists right down next to the Chinese, and then basically resisted the invasion of Mongols. However, we need not to skip the history. We need to get to the point on why the South China Sea is happening. So that's why I only included Ming and Qing. So we get the point that the traditional dominance of the area actually belongs to this, despite multitude of controls. I've had several historians claim to me that Majapahit actually was a contending faction in the South China Sea as well, at least during its very dominant part. So yeah, that's why history is important, and that's why history is always eager to be understood. Now, for the second question about non-state actors, yeah, it's been developing theory in IR, for example, in the recently developing world where corporations are now maybe stronger than nations and certainly stronger than many small nations. Non-state actors are an important aspect in maritime security. And not to mention as well, we mentioned that non-state factors, right? It's mostly about that, it's non-state actors. We see that in the Golden Triangle, in maritime security part, the ones doing that are not state, the ones smuggling those, these are individuals. So basically, states have now to contend with non-state actors in order to safeguard their maritime security. So if you ask about my viewpoints on those, they are important as well to consider when you were talking about maritime security. And lastly, about what Dr. Murray says about should we leave it to the Chinese? Well, I am an Indonesian, and Indonesia is a non-claimant state in the South China Sea. So in regards to this, Indonesia can just say to ASEAN, we can just leave it at that. We can just let the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia have all their problems while we focus on developing infrastructure in our nation first. That's Indonesian first viewpoint. So why didn't we do that? Because there is a sense among young people in Indonesia that we feel responsible because we are the biggest nation in ASEAN, and that we are a significant factor in building ASEAN. We are one of the founding members, and I think because of that, the identity itself is built among the young people like me. That's why I feel obligations to help my fellow ASEAN compatriots in order to showcase what they are having problems on in the South China Sea. However, in order to better answer this question, I believe that it should go to the Philippines and Vietnam.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff, Nick, and Karen and Hyun. Would you like to add anything? Yes, Karen?
I would just like to respond to Dr. Murray's statement about overfishing in the South China Sea. I'm an economist from the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines. It's easy to misinterpret the state of play in the fishing grounds of the South China Sea because there's misinformation going around. And this has something to do with the fact that the volume of fish catch has decreased as much as 60% in as little as 3 decades. But the fact remains the same that based on world statistics from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, that part of the top 10 exporters of fisheries are China, Indonesia, and Vietnam, along with other developed countries. Sorry, again, it's China, Indonesia, and Philippines. Thank you.
Hyun, why bother traditional security issues? Leave it to the major powers. Would you like to comment on that?
Actually, I would like to give some response to Professor Murray. You just made me feel so interesting saying that we need so many things from developed country, like from education, and now is we ask for military, right? And then after all, we are stuck by China. So that just 3 things it just come up to my mind from my personal view. First of all, the truth is we are a developing country, and of course we lack of many things in comparison to developed country. But basically there are 2 ways to grow stronger. The first one is you internal forces, which mean we try ourselves, we do our best, and the second one is to take full advantage of external forces. And let's say the second point is that the South China Sea is a water in the Southeast Asia region, but there are but this is a dynamic region for development, economic, and so on. So the interest of intra-regional and extra-regional country intertwine. So if you want to ensure your interest, you have to help a capacity building, and it's a national need. The third thing I want to share is regarding power imbalance. China is a big country in the region, and it's a matter of fact. That's why we need this kind of conference. That's why we need to talk and negotiate and get external power involved, because that's how we balance the imbalance. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have no more time. So I'm going to just give each of the young leaders just 30 seconds more to have your pick on what you've heard during the last 2 days on how to illuminate the green, how to illuminate the gray and light up the green. I'd give you 30 seconds each to tell us your pick on the best recommendations that you heard throughout the 2 days, throughout the 8 sessions on how to move forward in illuminating the gray and lighting up the greens. So who would like to start first? Jeff? Okay, all right, maybe Karen, since he had just spoken.
Thanks for throwing me under the bus, Jeff. I will remember this for the rest of my life. Okay. As someone who is both of Filipino and Chinese descent, and also as someone who is interested in geopolitics and involved in environmental management, what I notice is that the concept of, and actually it's not just the concept, it's political will is very important. We can talk about legal agreements, etc. We know that, for instance, China ratified UNCLOS, but if there is no political will to follow through, any cooperation agreements or whatsoever, including joint development agreements over disputed areas, will remain a gray area. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick?
Well, coming from a legal background, I still believe that the rule of law is the only way forward. And I have three answers to that: cooperation, cooperation, and cooperation. Events like this, where we can cooperate, where we can have meaningful discourse and dialogue, it's the only way we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Jeff, are you ready?
For me, one of the most wonderful sessions I had was actually during session 1, session 2, session 5, because it aligns with my interest in security, particularly on the Coast Guard part. So what I realized is that it was my last experience last year is that I saw that Coast Guard of many sizes, they must guard the maritime security. But what I realized right now, what is happening in, there are Coast Guard of various sizes, they are worshipped as Coast Guard. So what I intend is that the importance of having all this in under international norm. That's a first. Second of all, I would like to shout out for the emphasis on advancing technology. We have OSINT, we have many other technologies, as well as satellite views, as well as technical aspects like satellite photo and analyzing all that. That's all very interesting. So yeah, those are for me.
Thank you, Jeff. And last but not least, Ian.
Well, I just look over my notes and can you imagine it 25 pages? So it really hard to sum up, but I'll try. There were so many things I learned from the conference, from all the distinguished panelists. And actually there are another three takeaway from me. The first one is the rule of law. The second one, political willingness, as Karen said. And the last one, I think that the reason why we have the chance to sit here is because we are the future generation, and perhaps some of us will be the future leader, who knows. But older generation, please help us, guide us, and encourage with our path, and we'll do our best for the future. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Please join me in big round of applause to our young leaders. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. So we are now on to the closing session. Well, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, honestly speaking, I was a little pessimistic until session 7. I thought that we could not find enough light to light up the green, but it was really session 8 that made me optimistic. I thought that after listening to our young leaders, I'm fully now a believer in our future generations, and that we can find a path towards peace, stability, and sustainable developments in the maritime domain of the Indo-Pacific, with the help of the senior generations, but also with the active participation of the young leaders. But we also gathered a lot of ideas today through the 7 sessions on how we can move forward. We have found a lot of potentials that the oceans can bring. We have found a lot of mechanisms and cooperation ideas on how we can work together in order to realize those potentials. Of course, challenges remains, but we believe that we can be innovative enough in order to find ways to overcome those challenges. But in order to realize the potentials of the oceans, we of course have to first ensure peace and stability. And because of that, we have to deal with gray zones, and we have to illuminate the gray. Now, throughout the conference, we heard many ideas, and some had the idea that maybe the use of the term gray zones is the endorsements or recognitions of gray zones itself. Some thought that the use of the word lawfare is in itself a lawfare. Now, this phenomenon is not new. In Vietnam, there are those who believe that the use of the word Indo-Pacific is the endorsement of certain countries' strategies on the Indo-Pacific, or likewise, the use of the term global community of common destiny is an endorsement of such a term. I don't believe that. I believe that the discussion of a terminology is not taking a position on that concept. So I therefore believe that the discussion on how to illuminate the gray itself is a way to reduce the gray zones. And therefore, I believe that today's conference, throughout the 7 sessions that we have contributed in illuminating the gray, reducing the scope of intransparency, and promoting transparency in the maritime domain. I believe that through the 7 sessions and especially the last sessions of today, we have found many ideas in order to move forward, to make the maritime domain more transparent, more predictable, and find ways to be more effective cooperations and build partnerships. We believe that building international partnership is very critical and very important. The major powers obviously bear great responsibility, but the middle powers, the small powers, also need to share the burden and promote their own agency and cooperations through encouraging the major powers to compete in a non-zero-sum way and in a healthy way that does not pose any harms to the region. We also believe that by faithfully observe international law and conduct our activities within the framework of international law is going to reduce the scope of gray zones. We believe in the need to build capacity in order to better enforce and better conduct our activities in our jurisdiction is going to reduce gray zones. But we also believe through the discussions of today's different sessions that better coordinations between agencies, between different governments across interdisciplinaries such as defense, economic, diplomacy is also going to be needed in order to reduce the scope of gray zones. We need to continuously build the legal foundation in order to reduce the blend and blur of the legal environment. And through that, we believe that is going to limit the scope of abuse of international law and reduce gray zone altogether. Last but not least, I think there were a lot of ideas that suggested that we need to build resilience. Resilience through de-risking, resilience through diversification, but also resilience in working together, whether through unilateralism or multilateralism, in order to build our strength to cope with abuse and gray zones activities. So I think we have come up with a non-exhaustive list of recommendations that is coming out from this conference. Now, I'd like to have a few requests to all of you before you leave this conference. Please leave us with feedback, and you can do so by scanning the QR code on your table. And please provide us with suggestions on how we can make this series of conference better. We would also like to hear from you where you would like to be in next year's conferences. Every year, we take suggestions and clues from you in order to choose the venue for the next conference. So your suggestion is going to be vital in helping us decide where to take you next in next year's conference. We would also like you to support our wonderful young leaders in their participations in our Futures program by also suggesting new young leaders to join the program and also provide them with supports in order for them to be able to participate, whether online or physically, in this program. So that's it for now. And at this time, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to all of you who participated and who remain until these hours. Your support, your presence, and your active participations is the vital reason why this conference is successful. I'd like to especially express our gratitude to all the keynote speakers, to all the moderators, to all the panelists, especially the ambassadors who did a wonderful job in moderating the sessions, the panelists whose presentations really light up this conference, and especially your participation, all of you, for actively participating in the conference. I'd like to especially express our gratitude to those of you who have been participating in this conference on multiple years. All the ambassadors who are sitting on the third rows, and many of you here have been participating since the very beginning without failing to show up in every of our conference. So thank you so much. I would also like to express our gratitude to all our partners, PVN, the CAS, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the Lawyers Association, the Foundation for East Sea Studies, the various embassies in Hanoi, the UK embassies, the Canadian embassies, the Singapore, Indonesians, Australian embassies, and the embassies of Japan. Your partnerships and support has been fundamental in helping us organize the conference. We would also like to thank the Ho Chi Minh City Council for facilitating and for helping us organize this conference. We would like to thank you, Viet Center, the company behind the organizations of this conference and many other conferences that we hold. Their professional support have been fundamental in ensuring a smooth conference. And I'd like to also thank the interpreters at the back who've been working quietly behind the scene in order to help translate this conference. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all my DAV colleagues once again. Professor Lanang and her team has done a wonderful job in putting these pieces together in order to ensure a high quality conference. So please join me in thanking Professor Lanang and her wonderful team. Well, thank you very much. This has come to the end of today's working part of the conference. There's a following part and there'll be announcement shortly after this, but I'd like to once again thank all of you and looking forward to seeing you again in the next year's conference. Thank you.